Today I'm going to use a speakeasy for part of this discussion. This is something we use in Second Life to help those who have hearing difficulties. So if we've got something that's prepared in advance, we can actually get subtitles very easily to go along with the talk. And we try and do as much as we can here in this place on the basis of universal design. In other words, facilitating people of all and any abilities. So this will probably help you guys anyway as well. Oh, right. Now I've got a problem here. This doesn't work very well. Maybe I'll do it in this. Okay. So we're talking about Marshall McLuhan today, and he was a cultural and media theorist working in the second half of the 20th century. He used media to examine society at a time when Western civilization was on the cusp of major change. He referred to it as the Electric Age, but that term really is a bit obsolete now, and we tend to call it the Electronic Era. That's really a term that's a bit more familiar to us now. The period saw the telephone become ubiquitous, as almost every household had a copper wire landline installed. The phone was invariably situated in a hallway or other such transient space, and it soon became one of the key communication tools for families. Radio and newspapers were giving way to television as the dominant form of entertainment, providing news, movies, shows, and edutainment. Just like the telephone, there was generally only one TV in the house, often dominating the main family room so that everyone could watch together. So today I'm going to talk about three aspects of McLuhan's philosophy, which he described by typically short epigrams. Firstly, the medium is the message, which will be familiar to those of you who've had a look at the reading material. Secondly, the global village, which is a term you might have heard before, but probably are not aware of its origin. And thirdly, the epigram, we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. Now, I mentioned this last week, but I don't want to bore you guys to death by talking non-stop for the entire class. So I'm going to rely on your engagement as we try and unpack these concepts and try to understand not only what McLuhan might have meant or had in mind, but what value, if any, his ideas might have in our online digital environment today. So let's start by me asking you what you understand by the term the medium is the message. And let's start by identifying what the term medium means here. Can you give me some examples of media? And feel free to use voice or nearby chat and text. Social media, there's one. What else does the term media cover? TV, yeah. Digital media. Radio, movies, very good. Anything else coming to mind? Streaming platforms. Okay, very good. Lots of examples, great. So now, thinking about those examples of media, how can they be the message? Surely the message is separate from the medium. For instance, when I confirm the final submission date for your assignment by email, Surely the content, in other words, the submission date, is more important than the fact that you received an email, rather perhaps than a non-verbal or a verbal notification in class. What do you think? Why do you think McLuhan is suggesting that this medium might be more important than the message? Or have you any idea? You can type a question mark if you have no idea. Okay. Right. Okay, very good. So, plenty of opinions from the class? Not really. But anyway, let's move on and see if I can begin to explain it. We focus on and highlight the most important part of the message. Okay, Debbie, that is good. That's important. If some of you looked at the recording of the Australian television interview with McLuhan, you'd have spotted that he's actually asked a similar question. And the question was put in this way: is the discussion being held in the TV studio not important? And his response was that he didn't say content is unimportant, but the impact of content is far less than the impact of the medium. So when he's saying the medium is the message, he's not saying that the message is not important. He's just saying that the medium has a bigger impact. So anything I might say, for instance, in an email has less impact than the fact that I am using email and the infrastructure that supports this medium. And again, it's not immediately obvious what McLuhan is actually saying here. That needs a little bit more unpacking, I think. So let's take an analogy from history, one that demonstrates the unforeseeable impact that a new medium might have had on society. We're going to look at the development of the automobile. So try to imagine the world before the car. People traveled by foot, by horse, or by train perhaps. Most didn't travel very far from their homes that frequently. If they did need to travel, the distance was usually not great. How far can you walk in a day? Or how far can a horse bring you in a day? Somewhere between 5 and 20 kilometers perhaps. If you needed to go any further, you would need to take a carriage, your own private one if you were rich, or a public coach otherwise. Or maybe take a train. Excuse me. For example, a member of the Irish Parliament in the 19th century, Daniel O'Connell, travelled from Dublin to his country house in Kerry to spend the summer by the ocean every year. The journey is roughly about 300 kilometres. It took him a week by carriage, stopping at a different roadside inn every night. I imagine the journey also required much advanced planning, and there must have been quite a team of men and horses to complete it. Coach drivers, grooms, servants, and perhaps even guards to protect them from highwaymen. You can see why the majority of people in the world never moved very far from the place they were born. Travel was both difficult and expensive. When the first horseless carriages began to appear, people found them either amusing or alarming. They certainly seemed rather harmless. No reason to suspect that they would change the nature of our society. But eventually, the infrastructural change that was required to support the private automobile not only changed the physical landscape and the environment, it also changed lives and social patterns that had never been disrupted to such an extent before, except perhaps in times of war. The change was rapid compared to previous developments. Within 40 years, there was a network of surfaced roads serviced by garages providing petrol and repair services. The teams of people that previously supported the traveller and the roadside inns that fed and accommodated them slowly disappeared. The nature of society has now changed out of all recognition. I can now travel from Dublin to Kerry and back in a single day. And I can do that regularly, without having to plan very much in advance. People commute great distances to work because of the car. They can move from their birthplace with ease. On the other hand, society pays a price for this freedom. Huge numbers of people are killed in road accidents every day. Even more significantly, the increasing use of fossil fuels has contributed to global warming and the changing shape of our environment. Do you think the early motorcar drivers realised the impact their activity would have on the development of Western society? Did they believe the medium, in other words, the infrastructure that supports the car, the roads, the petroleum industry, auto manufacturing industry, and so on, was the real message they needed to be aware of, rather than the content of their short journeys, mostly taken for pleasure in those early days? McLuhan's suggestion that the medium is the message is really saying that we need to look beyond the content to identify the real impact of any technology. Otherwise, we run the risk of allowing technology to lead us into danger, just as we have done by becoming reliant on non-renewable fossil fuels to sustain the lifestyle to which we have become accustomed. If there had been an awareness of this impact back in the 19th century, it might have led to a different outcome. Can you imagine different approaches that might have been taken towards harnessing the technology of the combustion engine? That's something I'd like a response on if you can. So, how else could that technology have been harnessed back in the 19th century that might have led to a different outcome and a different society for us today? Hazard a guess, somebody. So today, effectively, the development of the combustion engine has led to individual car ownership. It's led to a network of roads which are designed to cater for the individual car driver. How else might that technology have been harnessed? Maybe in a different way. More sustainable. Yeah. Unpack that a little. What do you mean by more sustainable? As motorcycles are being run by gas. Oh, right. So you mean different fuels? Could use more renewable energy. Okay. But when the car was developed, the automobile was developed originally in the late 19th century. There was no sense, was there, that we would run out of oil or gas or petrol. There seemed at that stage to be almost an eternal supply. Let's say that people had decided not to develop cars. What else could they have developed with that technology? How else could transport have developed, for instance? Boats, bikes, ships. Still the same principle though, isn't it? Boats and ships still burn fossil fuel. Okay, bicycles don't, but they don't go as fast. It was the speed and convenience of the motor car that led to its success, wasn't it? What if the technology had been put into developing a more public infrastructure? So buses, trains, and so on, rather than a private automobile. So what if society had decided that we wouldn't allow individuals to own cars, and that the only way people could travel using this new technology would be using buses, which carried much more passengers and was much more efficient, and trains. How do you think, what might have happened then? How might that have changed our society? And don't let one or two people be the only ones to contribute. We need to hear from everybody. Better environment and less death, accidents. Now that's a good point, Bianca. So certainly less deaths and less accidents, I suspect. Also, there wouldn't have been as many vehicles traveling, so perhaps less pollution in the environment. There'd be a lot more trains, and public transport would rapidly develop. So public transport might be a lot more efficient than it currently is, mightn't it? It'd be quieter, wouldn't it? Anybody who lives near a busy road knows how noisy the traffic is. There'd be less traffic. We might have a different infrastructure. We might not have busy roadways in the way we currently have. So, for instance, train tracks tend to be protected roads, if you like. You know, train tracks don't run through housing estates. They don't run through built-up areas where people live. They also tend to be fenced off for safety. If the combustion engine developed only for buses, we might have had similar routes for that traffic. More illness would spread. Explain that one, Debbie. You mean because people were traveling more, that illness would spread more? Is that it? Yeah, people will be traveling together and in crowds. Exactly. So that's true. And certainly we know that from the early days of world exploration. Europeans brought many diseases to the Americas, for instance, that the native populations there were unable to survive, and many populations were wiped out by disease. It's harder to distance oneself. I think if we had communal transport, would it be that we might have more communal cities? We might have developments of towns and cities based more on community needs rather than individual needs. So we might have a very different kind of society as well, mightn't we? So, for instance, if society had taken the decision that this new technology was going to be harnessed for the benefit of all and for the benefit of developing communities rather than individuals, that would have also led to the development of towns based on community needs rather than in individuals' need. So towns might have been more planned. What might that have resulted in? Can you imagine? And let's get some comments from some others. Debbie, Bianca, and Sharon are the only ones commenting. Oh, Hallie has commented. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Anything to add to that? No, worn out. Okay. Let's move on then. Let's talk about the global village. So, what on earth is that? Does anyone have any ideas? Does it make any sense to you? Have you heard of it before? Type a Y if you've heard the term the global village. Or type an N if you haven't. Yeah. No. All right. Okay. So what do you think it might mean then? It sounds like a contradiction in terms, doesn't it? So if you think of a village, what do we mean by a village? Our environment. Okay, Sharon, you're on the right track. Yeah. So a village, what is a village? Come on, that's an easy one. Everybody surely knows what a village is. Just give me a few words to describe a village. A community, yeah. Community. Very good. So it's usually small, isn't it? A small town, exactly. And then if you add global to village, what does global mean? The world, worldwide, exactly. So it means the whole globe or planet. So there's definitely a contradiction in terms there, isn't there? Well, let's go on and see. Excuse me. So the oral tradition of pre-literate society, when people in a village gathered around the fire to hear stories and share news, was the dominant one in human society for thousands of years, pretty much until the invention of writing, really. The main sense organ at that time was the ear, and the nature of listening, whether to talk, to song, the crackling fire, or the ambient sounds in the environment, is communal and largely informal. You listen as part of a group, while also engaging in other activities, tuning in and out as you wish. Writing in itself did not really affect this lifestyle to a huge degree. It was something for the wealthy and the educated, which usually meant those living in monasteries at that time. The development of the printing press, however, was very significant because it supported the mass production of the written word and resulted in literacy becoming commonplace, even among the poor. The eye took over from the ear, and because the nature of reading is solitary, it required dedicated attention and quietness. Reading alone, along with the affordance of first-person narrative in literature, led to a shift in focus from the communal to the individual. As the 20th century progressed, McLuhan observed families coming together to watch television communally. They gathered around the glowing CRT screen in a way that reminded him of the village campfire. And despite the pictures, he noted that television returned humans to the oral tradition and the use of the ear as the dominant sense organ. You are all probably too young to remember when terrestrial TV channels broadcast to rigid schedules and viewers were all watching the same shows simultaneously and often chatting together as the programme played in the background, all leading to McLuhan to coin the phrase the global village. In some ways, he seemed to be anticipating the development of the internet and the World Wide Web, which has shrunk our sense of the world even more. Until the advent of the pandemic, we seemed to be living in an incongruously large global village. Do you think that that's still the case? Or is globalization now at an end? Any thoughts? Not yet. Okay. And why not? Why do you think globalization is not at an end? Some people are suggesting that globalization is halting. What kinds of examples are they giving to support this? Marvel Universe movies and Super Bowl Sunday. Very good. Yeah, we even get Super Bowl Sunday in Ireland now. Country that has no American football, or at least very little of it played here. So why would anyone suggest that globalization might be coming to an end? What's happening around the world that might suggest that? Have you any idea? What's changed in the last year or two? From your own personal experience. Okay, the pandemic. That certainly brought things to a stop, didn't they? I mean, we all retreated into our own homes. But we've emerged again since the pandemic. But what has changed since we've emerged, if anything? Did you all think COVID has introduced virtual tools? Okay, so the virtual has become much more acceptable. Online engagement has become much more common, hasn't it? We were forced to adopt it really fast. And we did, in many areas. But has the world returned to pretty much the same form as it was before COVID, do you think? Have any of you, just from your own personal experience, noticed anything different? Better communication. So, not fully, Debbie, you say. It hasn't fully returned. So, give me some examples of how the world hasn't returned to the way it was before. Okay, so many people still want to work from home. So many people don't want to face back into that long commute they might have had before, and they want to work at home. And in fact, that is being supported by legislation in many countries. People are more wary of large crowds. So maybe less likely to gather in big crowds. People have obviously returned to work in person as well, so it hasn't entirely stayed the same as it was during COVID. There's social anxiety due to not having to communicate for so long. That's true. People have lost the knack of communication, and we're more cautious about hygiene. Is there anything that's changed outside of COVID? Not just kind of because of COVID, but because of that prolonged period of absence, or rather since the pandemic ended. What else has happened in the world that's shaped how globalization might be viewed? Have any of you noticed that sometimes when you go to buy a product, it's not available anymore? Or the store has run out of that particular product and they won't get it in for another week or two? Have you noticed those kinds of shortages? Anybody? Say no if you haven't. You have. Okay, so he has. So what do you think is causing that? Certainly before COVID, it was rare that if you went to a store you couldn't get what you wanted. When everyone bought all the toilet paper in the stores in 2020, Brexit. So Brexit has certainly had an effect, hasn't it? And Brexit is really a backlash against globalization, isn't it? So it's a country saying we don't want to be part of the European community anymore. We want to be self-reliant. We want to be able to make our own laws. So we're withdrawing from this. It's not exactly the European community is not exactly a global organization, but it's pretty big. So Brexit is one thing that's had an impact. Anything else? What else is happening worldwide? Yeah, prices are going up. War in Ukraine. Yeah, that's an important one, isn't it? And what has the effect of the war? What effect has the war in Ukraine had? Inflation. Well, inflation is as a direct result of the war in Ukraine, exactly. What other effect has it had? Xenophobia. Yeah, absolutely. It's brought a lot of um, racial tension um, back into focus. It's obviously producing a number of refugees, and that's people who react against that are using that as a platform to promote themselves. Anything else? Can you travel to Russia now today if you want to? No. So if you think about it, before COVID, we could pretty much go almost anywhere in the world we wanted to go. Now, since COVID, since the war in Ukraine, or the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, all of a sudden the world is getting smaller. There are lots of places we can't travel to anymore. We can't go to Russia. People are cautious about going to Eastern Europe. Russians can't travel outside of Russia, except to a very limited number of places. Other tensions are becoming exacerbated around the world, aren't they? So that notion of the global village and the global world and globalization is suddenly under threat. Now, what impact do you think that might have? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Or does it matter at all? Not a good thing. Why is it not a good thing, Bianca? Or anyone else? Why is it not a good thing? It divides the world, and there's more conflict between countries. And what might the outcome of that be? Or less chance of trading goods, yeah, hence the shortages we're seeing in the shops. Less resources because they're all being focused on building war machines. Import and export of products are harder. And on a global perspective, what about global warming? Doesn't it need a world that's cooperating and looking at the planet as our home to address that, rather than people looking at a particular country or nation or island or continent as their home? So for me, the greatest threat that we're seeing at the moment is the lack of agreement globally about how to address the biggest problem we're facing as a species, which is how are we going to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, which are firstly running out and secondly causing huge damage to our home. So while there might be a reverse in the globalization of the planet at the moment, it is probably going to become necessary for that to be reversed again and for us to have a much more focused sense of the globe and how we are going to live together on this planet. The final phrase that I mentioned at the beginning is when McLuhan himself never actually said it. It's we shape our tools and thereafter our tools shape us. The term was actually coined by one of McLuhan's students, but it certainly is an accurate description of his philosophy. So what do you think that means? How could our tools shape us? Anyone have any idea how our tools might be able to shape us? We adapt to technology. Okay. How do we adapt to technology? Do we control social media or does it control us? Exactly. Commuting to school instead of walking? We invented phones for communication, but for some people it's their only use of socializing with others. Okay, so the technology has unexpected outcomes, doesn't it? We develop a tool for one purpose, but it then gets used for another purpose, and sometimes that other purpose begins to reshape the very nature of our society. To understand the concept, we first need to consider our definition of a tool. So one of the texts that I gave you to read describes McLuhan suggesting that part of a human, the hand for instance, could merge with an object to create something new that did not exist before. The example given is a hammer hand. So when I pick up a hammer, my hand changes and so does the hammer, leading to a new entity, a hammer hand. And this enables me to do things I couldn't do before. I can nail pieces of wood together to build structures. I can defend myself against attack, or I can kill prey and eat meat rather than relying on the diet of berries and nuts. In effect, I have intervened in my environment and shaped it more in my favour. This understanding of tools as extensions into our environment both broadens and complicates the issue. For example, language may be considered a tool in this context. So once you see our tools in this context, McLuhan's ideas come into sharper focus. We have seen how the development of the printing press led to major unforeseeable changes in the nature of human society. The shift from communal to individual led to a questioning of religious thought, for instance, the Age of Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and now is resulting in global warming. We looked at how the invention of the automobile led to equally massive changes in society. That is what McLuhan was warning us about. The need to be conscious of the impact of our tools on society, so that we can at least attempt to mitigate the unwanted outcomes of change. As we progress through the current digital transformation of society, this awareness might serve humanity very well. How do you think our current tools might change the future of society? And I'm thinking here of digital tools. Anybody? Machines and technology will take over people's jobs, and in fact they're already doing it, aren't they? So many jobs are now redundant, and that was always the case with technology. Tools to a large extent are developed to replace human work, and so inevitably, while they make some people's lives easier, they make other people's lives more difficult by making them redundant. What other impacts are digital technologies having on our lives and our society, I'm thinking in particular? So not just personally, but the development of society. Future historians will definitely have a clearer picture of the past and now our present than we did. Is that because we have such a major record of it? Debbie, is that what you're thinking? Yeah. Sharon, addiction, yeah. Addiction to technology and some of the tools produced by technology. What kind of impact might that have on society? Isn't it interesting that certainly during the age of the Industrial Revolution, it was considered that the development of technology would allow us all to have much more leisure time. But then when people did get leisure time, they weren't quite sure what to do with it. So what's going on there? We become lazier, Davy says. Yeah. And what happens then? What happens if people don't have jobs? Or don't have something to do? What tends to happen to you during the holidays? As the holidays go on longer and longer, perhaps you work during the holidays, but if you remember back to when you were a kid, you were at school and you had long summer holidays, what tended to happen towards the end? You lose purpose. The days begin to flow into each other, don't they? You lose a sense of purpose. And when you lose a sense of purpose, you begin to lose your sense of your own identity. Isn't that right? People get bored. So work, or whatever you call it, whether it's physical activity of some sort, or even intellectual or mental activity, is something that we kind of need as human beings, isn't it? So when we're looking at technology that replaces the actions and the activities we're currently involved in, we need to be careful that we have something else to put in their place, so that we have purpose, a sense of purpose. What kind of impact do you think a virtual world like this, like Second Life, might have on people and on society? Gives opportunities for people of disabilities or who can't go out. Okay, so it does, doesn't it? That's something we'll be looking at later on in the module, actually. We'll be meeting with people who are resident in Second Life because they have a disability that doesn't allow them outside the house. And so Second Life provides them with an alternative social outlet, opportunity for social engagement. People might forget what's going on in the real world. It's kind of hard to imagine that Second Life as it is now would replace your first life. But then when the automobile was invented, it was kind of hard to imagine that it might become an ubiquitous device that nearly everybody would have access to. So if you extrapolate and think, if digital technologies like virtual worlds or VR develops in the same way that our other technologies have developed, it could be very sophisticated in 20 years, couldn't it? And you might forget much more easily what's going on in the real world. Would that matter, do you think? Yes. Why? Why would it matter? Instinctively, we think that. Instinctively, we think, yeah, that would matter. That's a problem. But why? Why would it be a problem? Anybody? Why would it be a problem if this technology developed to such an extent that it was difficult to tell it from real experiences? We're down to that question, would you take the red pill or the blue pill, aren't we? Do people understand? Do you know that reference? No. Anybody here seen the movie The Matrix? Type a Y if you've seen The Matrix. Type an N if you haven't. You've heard of it, Sharon. Okay. Wow. All my references are too old. Okay, so The Matrix was a movie in which it was revealed that for the first part of the movie, when everybody was walking around doing their job, in fact, they were living in a computer simulation. And the hero of the movie is given the choice to take a blue pill or a red pill. The blue pill would tell him the truth and the way forward, and would reveal to him the illusion he was living in or the simulation he was living in. The red pill would just allow him to go back to the simulation and carry on. So obviously there wouldn't be much of a movie if he took the red pill. So he took the blue pill and got out of the simulation, and hence the movie carried on. But that was my reference. So if the illusion or the simulation is so real, how do people get out of it? Yeah, it's an interesting film, an interesting idea. More recently, in fact, last year, one of the people that I've referenced in the reading list, David Chalmers, who's a professor of philosophy. He's Australian, and he was based in an Australian university originally. He's now based, I think, in NYU in New York. He's just written a book called Reality Plus, and he suggests, yeah, Keanu Reeves was in the movie. Chalmers suggests in Reality Plus that virtual reality is going to be as real reality, or as I like to call it now, the natural world. And he's suggesting that people will be able to live as fulfilling and as worthwhile lives in virtual reality as they might be in the real world. But he's a philosopher, so he's talking philosophically speaking. But what other impact might that have? For instance, would it surprise you to hear that there are people now seriously suggesting that because the planet can't support the population we currently have living in it, one way might be to one thing to do might be to allow the poorer of the world live in a virtual space while the wealthy could enjoy the natural world. What would you think of that as a solution to the problem of global population? Pretty horrible, isn't it, really? Strange, but hard to believe that people are actually proposing that at the moment, or considering it even. Not very different from suggesting that it alienates people of poverty. Doesn't sound realistic. Let's come back to that in a moment. It's not a million miles away from the ghettos in the 19th century where, for instance, Jews were forced to live in areas of the city where only Jews could live, to leave the rest of the city available for others. So when you begin to divide populations like that, what tends to happen? You tend to get rebellion and war, don't you? People won't put up with it. They'll fight back. Yeah, Sharon, you say it doesn't sound realistic, and it kind of doesn't with the state of our technology now, but it is possible to imagine, at least, that the technology could become sufficiently advanced that it would be realistic. We can only postulate about that now. We can't know for certain. But it's worth postulating about it and thinking about it, because we need to be aware of these dangers, if you like, so that we can try and avoid them occurring. If we, just to kind of conclude on this, if we look at the word technology more closely, it can help us towards a more nuanced understanding of the term. So it comes from the ancient Greek word techne, which means a system or a method of making or doing, an art or a craft, a technique or a practice. Noel Fitzpatrick, who's Professor of Philosophy here in TU Dublin, suggests that this approach allows us to have a wider understanding of technology, not just as a tool, but also as a form of becoming human. So, through techne, in other words, all forms of techniques and practices, we actually become who we are. This means that technology is not simply about tools, but is a way of becoming who we are. The human is in fact a form of technical life. And that also brings the impact of humanity on the planet into sharper focus. But as I say, perhaps that's something we might explore in a later class.